So we look like we have people gathering, which is great. So let's give people 30 seconds or so before we get going. Lynn, I believe we're recording this, so if you want to set up whatever's needed for recording, that'd be great. Okay, so as people settle in, I'll welcome people to this Marsh event, Navigating the World of Elevated Risk, and importantly, implications for cyber risk management. I have with me two colleagues that I've known for several years who are going to help me go through a number of topics that are particularly important as we consider the implications of COVID, elevated risk or the manifestation of certain risks, and what that means for us in terms of our practicalities, in terms of insurance, in terms of what we need to do as organizations to be ready. So if you can go to the first slide, please. So in terms of what we're going to cover today, we're going to give a quick illustration about the current risk context, what the new world of elevated risk means for us collectively, some real changes in the cyber risk environment, and some of these have already hit the media and some of these we're feeling in our day-to-day lives, changes to the cyber insurance markets, and then a quick look ahead. And throughout this process, rather than just hearing our voices alone, we're going to be taking a poll from those who are participating, so please do be ready. We have a tight set of questions, but we just want to get some input from you as well in terms of your sentiments, your feeling, and what you're seeing out there. So why don't you do some quick introductions to start with. So I'm Paul Nee. Despite my British accent, I'm actually based out of the United States in New York City, and I lead our cyber practice here at Oliver Wyman. Tom?
And good morning. I'm Tom Furman, Managing Director in Marsh Advisory. I'm a cybersecurity consultant based in Washington, D.C.
Very good. And Bob?
Morning, I'm Bob Parisi, Managing Director and Cyber Product Leader at Marsh.
Very good. So are we able to get into the first poll? Yes. So can we be ready with your buttons, please, and pick one of these. Well, we can't vote, so it literally is up to you. So if you can pick which of the following rank amongst your top 5 risk concerns for 2021. So this is starting to think about as we end this year, going to next year. Click as many of those as you think is appropriate. I'll carry on talking, and then we're going to do a little bit of an auctioneer's countdown. So ready, going, gone. If you complete your voting, please. And then Lynn, if we can see the results, that'd be great. So interesting. We have financial stability and performance almost neck and neck. Well, there's a reasonable spread between financial stability and political and social unrest. On the financial stability point, Bob, I mean, you can see forward in terms of the insurance industry and what's out there. Does that financial stability kind of align with what you're seeing out in the market?
You know, it is, and I think that's, you know, we can tie that obviously to the pandemic, right? You know, the economy has been roiled with uncertainty based upon not knowing when we're going to come out the other end of this pandemic and what that means to the global economy and the local economies.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And the workforce morale and productivity is something that we encounter a lot. There's a degree of insecurity, uncertainty out there as regards, you know, what your job looks like and the nature of the workforce. And those who've had to work from home, we have seen a productivity spike. But, you know, the question is that sustainable? So thank you very much for that. We'll bank these results and make them available following this. So there's a presentation out there. As I start, this is just a quick context setting story from my own personal experience. So as Oliver Wyman, we work with many organizations in testing their preparedness. And one of the largest corporations in the United States engaged us this past August to say, can you help us with a more complex cyber exercise, not just a straight through one, but an exercise that has 4 components to it. We've got progressive ransomware because that seems to be the weapon of choice these days. We've got protests abroad, we've got blockades that are happening, and we've got a hurricane. And this was interesting as a multivariant exercise, which was unusual for them to actually test all 4 things at the same time. However, in the real world, if we go to the next slide, there was a lot more happening beyond this. So we actually had 2 hurricanes. For those of you who recall, we had Laura and Marco. We had protests domestically in many cities, a COVID pandemic to deal with, extensive wildfires, and then persistent attacks on many of our third parties who are subject to ransomware. Now, if I'd have gone to many corporations a year ago and said, this is the kind of situations we need to be prepared for right now, they'd frankly think I'd spent far too much time in those states where cannabis is legal. Just to envisage all these things happening around at the same time is pretty interesting as an outlier. And arguably some of these risks have been present for a while, but we've seen a real manifestation of those in 2020. So what does this mean? This elevated risk manifestation, some of it's of our own doing. We've gotten more and more enamored by digital tech. It's fueling our cyber risk conditions. We have more seamlessness now as more things are connected. Autonomous transport, and yes, we do have autonomous submarines now. I was pretty excited for us to be involved in testing those recently. Robotics, where more and more things are being done by machines. We've seen the application of robotics for LIBOR, for example, where we have robots who are able to read and digest well over 40,000 pages a day as they look at how organizations can be prepared for LIBOR, artificial intelligence in more places, and more connectivity through the Internet of Things, and more microservice and connectivity. So the attack surface and the places of vulnerability have been magnified massively in recent times by these significant advances on the digital tech front. So what does this mean? It means that COVID is also in a position whereby this gets magnified even more, and we have an environment of greater exploitation. We've got very different modes of working. Most of us right now are on a Zoom or remote device. We're working in a home environment or a remote environment, and this means that the way we're using technology or the way we're exchanging data is very different than it was just a few months ago. We're utilizing technology in a different way. We have very different modes of exchanging data. If we think about the kinds of things that we're exchanging now via our domestic environments and our corporate environments, I've worked with a number of companies where during March and April, their data loss prevention centers were just going nuts because they were seeing data being exchanged in very different ways and people accessing their systems in different ways. So you'd have a working mother who might access the system at 10:30 at night after she's put her family down, and finding the DLP systems going, nobody accesses our systems normally at 10:30 at night. But in this new working environment, we are using technology in a very different way. We also don't have facilities access, and there are collaboration constraints, whether that's for information security, whether it's for working, whether it's for disaster recovery, etc. Our ability just to get together and do things has been massively constrained. And we're in an environment where rogue actor motivation has gone up tremendously. And I'll show some real examples of rogue actors who've used this current situation to their advantage. We've a 148% increase in ransomware attacks, and 90% of cyber professionals are considered as working overtime based on reviews by NetScout. And to date, we have 4.8 million denial of services attacks, up 25% for Western countries versus what we saw last year. So there's real opportunity for the rogue actors to take steps to be disruptive through this environment where we're strained and challenged in other areas. And I'll show some real examples on the next page. So these are all areas where it's both sneaky, exploitative, and deals with insecurities. So everything from adapted phishing, coronavirus measures PDF, which looks like it's a useful document on safety. It actually contains emotive malware, which is looking for areas of financial transmission, and keyloggers from the UK government. And this very recent one where we're looking at contact tracing. This looks like it's a valid text message that tries to understand whether you've come into contact with somebody who has COVID. Actually, when you click on that list, it's an identity theft piece of malware. So the bad actors themselves are exploiting the situation in ways we've never seen before, and ways that take advantage of people's insecurities and concerns through the COVID situation. So in the next poll, we're going to hear about what you think about COVID and its impact on cybersecurity. So Lynn, if you want to bring this up, please. So beyond the things I've gone through now, what impact has COVID and remote working had on your cybersecurity posture? Have things changed on a major basis? Is it kind of middling, so it's just some adjustments here and there? Or is it actually particularly minor? If anything, it's more just general hygiene and reminders rather than anything more significant. So if you can please vote now on with the remote working, what it's had on your cybersecurity posture, that'd be much appreciated. I'm going to do my auctioneer's close again. So, and the results are interesting, middling. So Tom, you're probably deep-seated in the cybersecurity space, and you've dealt with various situations of change. What does this middling figure say to you?
Well, it tells me that the individual worker, employee, is feeling the effect of changes in cybersecurity. And that's a little unusual and not surprising in the pandemic environment, but typically cybersecurity is somewhat transparent to most of us. And it's been routinized. Now we're all consciously connecting into VPNs. We're more conscious, or should be more conscious, about how we're handling data, and whether the wireless remote assistant is listening into the teleconferences. So I think that more people are feeling the effect of cybersecurity concerns day to day.
Right, and then just on the terms of cybersecurity posture, I guess you could argue that a middling figure like this is because organizations felt that they'd already had good practices in place, and the pivot wasn't quite so dramatic to get people into a position where they could work safely from home. Is that fair, or am I being over generous?
Well, I think that's on target.
Okay, very good. So, Tom, as you're speaking, do you want to take us into the next section, please, where we talk about some of these changes and what's actually happening out there?
Sure, sure. Thanks for that excellent look at the broad landscape of cyber risk. I want to drill down, as Paul mentioned, and look more closely at how those factors are affecting cybersecurity at the organization or company level. We've seen a lot of changes in cybersecurity in the last 8 months or so. It's easy to point to COVID and the global lockdown as the direct cause. And it is, I think, clearly to an extent. But I also think that the pandemic has been more of an accelerator of change that was already happening, rather than being the prime mover in the big picture. I think there's been two drivers building in the last several years that I think the pandemic accelerated. One is restructured work patterns, and the other is new business models. And both of them present cybersecurity challenges. So when I say restructured work patterns, of course, I mean the high level of remote working primarily. This has been building for years. We started seeing death of the office stories about 10 years ago, about how technology was making it such that there would be no need for offices. It's not a totally new idea. We're just living through it now. Even in the 2010s, in the early 2010s, we saw about 20% of American workers working from home at least part of the time. And suddenly, of course, in about March of this year, companies had to quickly make it possible for their workforce, at least the part of the workforce that works at a computer most of the time, to work remotely. And that means mostly at home. It's approximately 50% of all workers are working from home during the pandemic. But decentralizing operations had also emerged as a corporate strategy pre-COVID. So putting offices at locations that line up with the talent pool became a priority. And office workspaces changed to make them more casual and more collaborative. Along with these changes, cloud computing has been growing and growing. Amazon launched its first cloud service in 2006. There's been many entries into the field since then. And cloud computing became another tool in decentralizing operations. It became the most efficient way for many companies to store data and access business software and infrastructure. And it allowed companies to close or downsize corporate data centers. And the pandemic also put stresses on business processes and even business models. Meetings went virtual. Local shops took up e-commerce with online ordering and curbside pickup. Fitness companies moved to online workouts. Restaurants became retail grocers, and many other things that would not have been possible without technology. When it became clear in early March that a wide-scale lockdown was going to happen to slow and hopefully stop the spread of COVID, the technology was ready. If you think about it, in an earlier age, if this pandemic had hit 20 years ago, it would have been a very different response. We had the technology, and the response we chose reflected the technology capabilities. But a large remote workforce presents cybersecurity challenges. These would include, first of all, providing secure remote connections. So many of us probably use the corporate VPN every day when we go to work on our computers. That's a lot of infrastructure for a large company. With the rapid ramp up of remote workers, the IT shop and the IT security shops in many companies had to really scramble, in some cases, putting in temporary or provisional solutions to handle all the connectivity and data flow requirements securely. Workers at home are typically using consumer grade routers and Wi-Fi systems that can be easily exploited by hackers. Employees may mix corporate data with personal data on their personal devices, or they may use personal cloud backup systems for their corporate data. As I mentioned, these personal assistant devices may be listening in to teleconferences if they're within earshot. And cyber incident response becomes more difficult when an enterprise is widely scattered. There's also new concerns about data privacy. Is data adequately protected in remote environments? Are companies going to be capturing more protected health data, such as contact tracing and health screening that may be required for employees to enter a corporate office? Are companies capturing and saving that data? This would clearly raise privacy concerns. And the changing workplace hasn't finished changing. The debate continues. Is remote working more productive or less productive?
Yeah.
Is it going to stay that way, whichever it is today? Is it going to stay or change? Because we're probably going to see a continuation of remote working. Are employees happier or less happy? Or are they lonely or emotionally impacted in some way? What's happening to the corporate culture? So many believe that a hybrid model will be the common approach in the future, say 3 days per week in the office, 2 days at home. All of these changes will drive changes in cybersecurity architecture and processes for the long term. The bottom line is companies should build on the 8 months of experience we have all had with remote working and new business models to prepare strategically for the future. So now we have another poll question. So I'll turn it over to Paul to take us through that.
Excellent. Before we get into that, Tom, I just had a quick question. You raised a number of scary things and areas that may increase vulnerability. One of the things you didn't mention, and it'd be interesting your perspective on insider threat, because insider threat and the manifestation of an insider event, let's see, in fact, like the Panama Papers, for example, takes a while to manifest. In your opinion, is there an insider threat bump or an insider exposure coming based on the way we've had to work for the past few months?
Well, I always think of insider threat in two categories. There's the malicious insider and the unwitting insider. The malicious insider is the person who obviously has an agenda, and typically they have access. So the most dangerous and malicious insiders are the ones with access. I'm not certain, I don't have any data to say whether there's a bump in that type of insider threat or not. I would say the unwitting insider threat has increased. And you cited some of the phishing emails. This is how most of the unwitting insiders do their dirty work accidentally, by making a mistake, by responding to an email, by clicking a link, and as a result, compromising their credentials. So I would say definitely there's been a bump in that risk area.
Yeah, no, sorry.
Yeah, Tom and Paul, I mean, I don't think we can discount either the fact that we've got a lot of idle hands out there, right? And, idle hands are the devil's workshop. And, with unemployment rising amongst, every aspect of society, you're going to have an increase in people with, a motivation to, get revenge or just succumb to their baser instincts. So I don't think we should discount the fact that the pandemic has created a pool of potential, potential problems from a cybersecurity perspective.
No, I would totally agree. And I was in a conversation last week with a CFO of a Fortune 500 company who said, for the first time ever, we're going to produce all our annual reports this December remotely. Normally I'd have a team in an office next to my office doing this, and 15 of us would live and breathe this together through the large part of December. Well, now it's all going to be remote. Am I sure that some of those drafts and other information, those spreadsheets that I'm now circulating through what he called the ether, are going to be as safe as when it was in one command room? Not so sure. So I do think we're in a position whereby we're moving information, using information, sharing information in a very different way. We may not yet have seen the consequences of that.
But Paul, your point is spot on. The other piece is you've had companies working kind of a Herculean task to enable people to remote work, to onboard all of these folks to work remotely, and with all the perils that creates, as Tom just laid out. You have to assume that if you're doing all that, there are going to be times when you miss something else. And if you're focusing most, if not all of your attention on onboarding, the offloading, for lack of a better term, the disentangling from employees, there's going to be something that slips between lip and cup, and that's a concern that needs to be just not necessarily overwatched, but not forgotten.
Totally agree. So
I would like to add one point to the narrative that Paul mentioned regarding the annual report. This is a very good example of where specialized solutions are needed. They should not be sharing drafts. I don't know if they are or not. They should not be sharing drafts over email, for example. They should be operating out of a secure data room that they can either establish themselves or contract with an external provider. This is a specialized need. The risks are very high, and they could even encounter compliance risks if that information, the financial information, gets disclosed. So that's an example of another burden where specialized solutions might have to be implemented for specialized cases.
No, I totally agree, Tom. The conversation went further as well to say, what do we need to do as regards voice? Because when you've got a Zoom call, when you've got like 30 people on there, that 31st person who joins with just the phone number that you don't quite recognize, you don't always have time to check. And some people are on just Zoom, some people dial in and they use their laptop, etc. So there are also opportunities for people to infiltrate via video and audio as well as data streams.
Yeah, that's very true. And the various providers of telecasting services, teleconferencing services have attempted to address security. It becomes a very complicated challenge. And as you said, the last line of defense is those on the call recognizing everybody else on the call. When the numbers get too large, it becomes more difficult.
Very good. Okay, let's move on to the next poll, please, Lynn. So if you can bring that up and we'll go through giving people an opportunity to answer, that'd be appreciated. So poll number 3, please. So where do you plan a material change in your cyber risk spending next year? So there's multiple choice, so those that matter. So is it cybersecurity technology itself? Is it consultants and advisors? Change to hiring, changes to employee education, changes to insurance, or something else? Or do you anticipate that what happens in 2021 will be more or less flat compared to what you've invested in the last 2 years? So I'll let people go through giving answers to that. And then Tom, I'm going to put you on the spot to provide the first commentary on when the results come through. So as my auctioneers close, going, gone. If we can see the results, please, Lynn, that'd be great. So Tom, over to you.
All right, so notice technology wins in this case, technology spending. Now we all recognize that budgets are going to be under a lot of pressure. They are now, and they're going to be for the foreseeable future because profitability is down in a lot of companies and so on. So I find it interesting that technology and employee training are the top priorities, and that makes a lot of sense for the reasons we discussed earlier on technology and for the fact that the employees are really a big part of the attack surface now, the exposed surface of the enterprise, right at the employee level. So making sure they're aware of their responsibilities, and that they can detect phishing emails, and that they can take the right kinds of measures in their own environments. All that training is very important. I'm actually happy to see these results.
And Bob, with your insurance hat on, I can see insurance coming in third place there. Do you think that should be higher? Do you think that's about right? What's your view?
Well, Paul, I'm just glad it's not last, right? I'm also somewhat competitive, so I beat you and Tom, since 21% is higher than the 16% for consultants and advisors. But I think the fact that insurance is even on the list and viewed as an important aspect of where they're going to spend their dollars going forward is a recognition that these type of risks, this use of technology, dependence upon technology, handling of data, has become a risk that needs to be managed and can't just be, it's not just a problem you can buy your way out of. And I think that's reflected by, while cyber and technology is more than half of the responses, it's not 100%. There's a recognition that this is something other than just buy a new router, upgrade my endpoint protection. It's a more complex issue.
Very good. So on that point, why don't we transition to your particular piece, Bob? Because I know you've got a lot to say about this and what it means for the industry more broadly. So over to you to talk about the cyber insurance and the associated changes.
So thank you, Paul. If we can just kind of move to the next slide. So just to kind of tee up the, my 5 or 6 minutes talking about insurance and what's changed. I don't want to say that insurers have become myopic, but they've certainly become focused. Ransomware has become the single greatest concern amongst the cyber insurance marketplace, and for a variety of reasons that I'll go into in a moment. The pandemic and remote connectivity has certainly also added to their concerns, but in any other time, that might have been the biggest issue, but ransomware has and continues to suck much of the oxygen out of the room in discussions at all levels, whether you're talking to the CFO, the CISO, what have you. We're also seeing pricing change, where we're seeing an increase in attritional loss, which is kind of that systemic loss in a book of business. Increased losses due to ransomware have spiked. One of the things that's interesting, and you could look at a lot of different statistics, but we've seen ransomware increase in not just in its number, but in its severity. It's the most severe type of malware, and its severity in terms of dollars, the dollar cost associated with being a ransomware victim has almost doubled from 2018 to 2019. We obviously don't have the 2020 numbers left. What that means in terms of insurance coverage is that cyber extortion and the consequential business interruption are coming under increased scrutiny, and carriers are taking more care in how they approach it. They're doing that in a couple of ways. They're asking supplemental ransomware questions and diving more deeply into that when we go through the submission process. At the same time, we're faced with increasing demand. Buyers are recognizing that insurance is one of the legs of the stool to manage this risk. And that's coming from a couple of things. One, a general awareness of the risk, as cyber risk becomes viewed as an operational risk and is often part of their enterprise risk process. It also comes at a time when the property and casualty markets are going through what's referred to as the silent cyber initiative or mandate, which is essentially resulting in exclusions for any type of technology or cyber risk being placed on more traditional lines of coverage. So what does that mean in terms of actual changes to the insurance process? Kind of moving to the next slide. Okay, so what are their biggest concerns? Well, I didn't exactly bury the lead. I kind of revealed it. Ransomware is the biggest concern at the moment. We've seen attacks up 400% in 2019 compared to 2018. At the same time, we've seen almost more than a doubling of reported ransomware attacks or claims being placed with the insurance community. And if you think about that, the event, front runs the notified loss to your carrier. You could easily expect that reported losses, reported claims into the insurance community will more than double again if the events that cause those losses are more than doubling. One of the interesting things about the ransomware attacks we're seeing is that nearly half have included actual data exfiltration, which means they're not just threats, they are causing actual harm, both in terms of the theft of data as well as the consequential loss of revenue, the ability to operate. I already kind of commented on the fact that the severity has increased. Ransomware payments were up in the second quarter by 60%, and the actual loss suffered. So the out-of-pocket loss suffered by victims has also doubled in this year. And it's not, what's interesting is it's not just the small and medium enterprises that are being hit by ransomware, which is, I think, often an assumption. In 2019, we saw more attacks against large institutions with more than $5 billion in annual revenue in Q1 and Q2 of 2020 than we did in all of 2019. So it really is, ransomware is truly an opportunistic threat or bit of malware. Now, at the same time, we are in a pandemic, and we're seeing an increase in COVID-related phishing attacks. We've got a lot of people working from home, a lot of folks who were not educated or used to working remotely. They were used to being inside that nice perimeter, that nice moat and wall that had certain protections. And we're seeing phishing examples of, here's the latest news on where COVID infection rates are in your neighborhood. Here's how to get information on the latest information about, vaccines and therapeutics. So it's not just about trying to trick someone by saying you're a prince and you're trying to move money out of a country. They're playing to people's base fears, and it's very effective. We're also seeing targeting associated with companies that are in the development chain for vaccines and therapeutics. And that target coming from a variety of places, not the least of which is nation states. Now, the insurance community has responded in a couple of ways that I'll talk about, on the next slide. Okay, so I talked about two types of coverage that are being considered, or are what I describe as in flux. The cyber extortion ransomware coverage. We've seen a couple of developments that have, really roiled the market, the insurance market at least. One was recent regulatory activity or government activity that calls into question the propriety of ransomware payments, and this goes back to the OFAC listing and certification. If you are on the OFAC list, it means people can't do business with you, and that means that if you're paying ransomware to a OFAC listed company, you could be doing something illegal. So you've got the question now becomes, how do you achieve and pay ransomware? And what does it mean with regards to the future of how governments will look at interacting with those type of criminals? Ransomware payments have also caused insurers to take a hard look at this coverage grant, as ransomware payments have gone from the thousands and tens of thousands to the millions of dollars, and we're seeing that result in increased underwriting scrutiny. We've seen insurers now insist policyholders complete special ransomware applications. We're also have seen rumblings, although not yet implemented, of some carriers talking about sublimiting cyber extortion coverage. Now, that's a little grim. On a more positive note, the cyber insurance community has responded very positively around the remote engagement issue. And they've changed the way they define computer system to include the computer systems and all the technology that is now being deployed by remote users, remote workers, to make sure that coverage is not imperiled by the fact that someone is no longer necessarily just logging on from their PC in their office. They may be using their own personal laptop, their own personal mobile device. So we're seeing carriers engage in a kind of a right brain, left brain thing as they're concerned about the losses, but they're also responding to the changing environment that insureds are in. If we can move on. So almost done. So what does that mean to the cyber insurance marketplace? It means prices are going up. In the third quarter of 2020, we saw a almost 11% increase in the average insurance rate. That's up from a 6.5% for all industries. The primary rates are increasing less aggressively than the excess pricing, which had been more aggressive, and less expensive. And this is consistent with the 3 prior quarters. But the interesting thing is capacity remains ample. We continue to be able to put together programs exceeding $700 million. What we are expecting to see, though, is some tightening of capacity as insurers manage limits deployment to coincide with their global aggregation strategies. So that's the insurance side of it. I know we want to, hopefully give you a little bit of a look around the corner about what risk is coming and looking ahead. And I think Paul has another polling question.
Yeah, but before we go into that, just a question that's come up through the Q&A here. Be interested in, Bob, and what your perspectives are on this, because there is a view, and how real this is or otherwise is why I'm going to ask you the question, is that by having this insurance cover, are you actually effectively informing the digital kidnapper regarding who to pursue and more precisely what amount they should demand?
So no, and this is similar to how the insurance community views kidnap and ransom insurance, which is not new. Don't tell anyone. Don't publicly broadcast that you bought this insurance. Don't publicly broadcast that you bought cyber extortion coverage. I don't think, though, that this is something that is increasing the aggression or the popularity of ransomware. If cyber insurance, God forbid, went away tomorrow, I can almost guarantee that ransomware would continue unabated. It just would be coming out of a different pocketbook. Understood.
And then just lastly, in terms of recognizing the urgent nature of getting services back online, and this is why ransomware has been so popular, because as we're all working remotely, critical systems truly are critical, and organizations are minded to pay the ransomware just so they can continue services. What do you do as an insurance company to make sure that those people are prepared to stand up their systems quickly? Because insurance is one thing, but it's arguably a slower instrument than having to respond on the day of the ransomware attack. So how do you balance the two?
So as a broker, not an insurance company, we don't do. We're not really in that food chain. We do assist our clients in helping to maximize the coverage that they can obtain, and most cyber insurance is, especially for the ransomware and cyber extortion, is a real-time coverage experience. So unlike a home accident, a slip and fall, where you may go only to your insurance company well after the fact, most carriers are operating a 24/7 real-time network of forensic vendors, breach coaches, restoration firms that can deploy and do deploy in real time as the event is going on. So cyber insurance is a little bit different, and probably more like kidnap and ransom in that it is in the weeds in helping clients deal with this issue and get up and running. So from the forensics to the legal to the restoration, that's going on real time with the cyber insurance market and their policyholders.
Very good. Yeah, that's what I wanted to hear. So let's move on to a little bit of a glimpse into the future and again, what participants view here. So we're looking at risk management practice changes. So, and are you changing your overall risk management practices to address new and elevated risk landscape? So the simple three parts, yes, significantly, doing a lot here, yes, in minor ways, and the final part being no materially. So very simple three parts, one was high, medium, low, regarding what you're doing as regards changes for the overall risk management practices. So I'll give you a quick time there to answer that. And then just to close, gone. Lynn, if you can pull up the results, please, that'd be great. And in minor ways. So Tom, I'm going to ask you, because we probably should have asked in what minor ways, but based on your experience, what kind of minor changes have you seen organizations making as regards their risk management practices?
Well, when it comes to cybersecurity, I would declare that in most companies, what we call risk management is not very strong, in that even today, in many companies below the top, say, Fortune 500, which is the vast majority of the companies, of course, in the country, cybersecurity is largely outsourced to the IT shop or to the cybersecurity shop, if there is one.
Yep.
And it's thought of as a technical problem. And risk is a very granular thought, so I think I'll change a firewall rule because that'll help my risk, but it's not as disciplined a risk management function in many companies as I'd like to see it. So minor ways sort of rings true to that viewpoint. I'd be interested in other perspectives.
And then I guess following that lead, sorry, but 1 second, and there is cyber risk exposure itself is something that doesn't seem to be considered as broadly as you'd expect. So knowing what an event could cost you in material terms, I think very few organizations actually go down that path to understand how bad it could be for them, Tom. And I think there are areas where people could improve just knowing where their exposure is when it comes to cyber. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yes, I completely agree. I think that there's a lack of a shared view of what is my cyber risk among the leaders of a company. You could ask every leader of a company, how do you think about cyber? And you'll get an answer. But that doesn't mean the answers are consistent, because they don't necessarily collaborate on that management of that risk.
Bob, did you have a perspective?
Yeah, I'll more often kind of lean on the doom and gloom side, but I can say that we've seen a positive trend, and I believe it was an article I read coming out of the National Association of Corporate Directors, the NACD, that there was an increased participation in the company's enterprise risk management activity of looking at cyber risk. So I do think that there is a growing awareness, and it's been growing for a long time, that cyber risk, that technology-based risk, is at an operational or board level. And once you achieve that level of awareness, you do start to bring the various stakeholders in. You do get some consistency. We saw a very positive note in the survey that Marsh McLennan did with Microsoft, that companies that got to the level of being able to financially measure and quantify their cyber risk were more likely to also effectively manage it. So I think there's light at the end of this tunnel.
Right. Very good. Tom, in this part of this looking ahead and the new normal, do you want to give us your perspective on how you will reevaluate risk and start to build more resiliency?
Yes. Excuse me. Well, as we all know, cyber risk has been a top concern for most companies for a long time, whether or not it's focused as it should be. It's now not only higher in the risk exposure, but the risk character has changed, as we've talked about. So as the COVID environment changes, and hopefully we can put it behind us soon, let's think about cybersecurity and cyber risk management in the future. And I would make two main recommendations. First, to the point we just discussed, tighten the strategic management of cybersecurity as an enterprise risk. This is not a task for the IT security shop alone. It's not a technology problem alone. All leaders own cyber risk. That's very important. Every leader should take ownership of cyber risk in their domain. So how do you set your company up to make this real? I suggest the answer is focused cybersecurity program development. Define a governance structure that links the board of directors, the business leadership, the IT and IT security leadership, all the way down to IT and cyber operations. Write that structure down, write that governance concept down, and build policy and develop processes and define the flow of information and the decision-making authority at each level to make that governance concept a reality. I recommend using scenario analysis and simulations, for example, to develop insights that will build operational readiness at each level. A common set of scenarios of what could happen to us can define the agenda for the business continuity leadership. It can be a reference for the disaster recovery planners. It would be a reference for the business leaders, who are actually a large source of the input. So I really urge companies to think in terms of scenarios of what could happen and how would we respond, and how can we mitigate so that they don't happen. I also suggest, and this also goes to the point we just discussed, I suggest that you refresh or create the enterprise cyber risk register. What are the cyber risks that the organization has to worry about? Build a matrix, build a list. Use it to develop a unified view of cyber risk from the board down. And again, leaders at all levels and in all functions can use that and work from that template. It should rank risks by residual risk, likelihood and impact, and allow for the strategic management of those risks, because you know which ones are the ones that need the most attention. You involve all the business leaders, risk management, IT and IT security, compliance, general counsel, privacy leadership, business continuity, disaster recovery, supply chain. All leaders across the business will better understand the cyber risks and can do things to mitigate and prepare for them. Secondly, second major bullet is focus on cyber resilience. This means strengthen the company's ability to carry on in spite of cyber threats, in spite of threat actor activities, and to recover quickly if a cyber event occurs. Integrate security incident response planning with business continuity and crisis management planning. These need to come from the same truth data. And I often find that a company may have an incident response plan, but there's no reference in it to the business continuity or crisis management plans that are also ready to play in the case of an event. Those should be integrated or cross-referenced at a minimum. Now, a decentralized workforce can be a big contributor to operational resilience. Remote workers clearly may be unaffected by an event that might affect the corporate office, like a natural disaster or something more mundane, like a snowstorm. This could shut down the corporate office. Okay, we've had 8 months of practice with extreme remote working. So let's build on the experience and the lessons learned, because we're going to need it in the future, and you can use it as a positive, as a differentiator for improving resilience. And finally, improve operational readiness in cyber. That means having the ability to quickly detect cyber events and the refined processes to respond to them organizationally. So detection is an embarrassment, generally speaking. We read, and I don't know how accurate the data is, but we read the average time to detect a cyber incident is 100+ days, 3 months and more to detect an event. Okay, we need a benchmark of about 5 minutes, folks. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in cyber detection, and I'm in the game. I know how difficult that is, but that's a target that needs to be paid attention to.
And Tom, as you think about these things, you've described them as corporations or multifunctions. What's your perspective on scaling this down, as it were? Because smaller companies are just as vulnerable, if not more vulnerable, because they may not have the resources or apparatus for cyber defense. So, when you're down to the SME level and some of the organizations who may have less than 50 employees, what can they do?
Yeah, that is a tough problem. And I sometimes, with a note of sadness, point out that a lot of companies are below the cybersecurity poverty line. And by that, I mean, they have real cybersecurity needs, but the enterprise does not have the resources to protect accordingly. So you have to really manage risk. I think outsourcing plays a big part of that. Outsourcing some IT, putting applications in the cloud, or using software as a service applications for your business needs, and maybe outsourcing cyber event network monitoring. But it is a tough challenge as companies get smaller, because every company is a target, and the smaller ones don't have the resources all the time to really protect themselves. Understood.
Bob, do you want to give us a final few words and your insights regarding insurance, please?
Sure, and I just happen to have a slide for that. So I think with the cyber insurance market, we're seeing a flight to quality. And by that, I mean a two-pronged flight. We see buyers looking at carriers that have the ability to, basically have a sustainable product that will be there, for the years going forward, because technology and cyber risk is not going to lessen, it's going to increase, and you want to be with a carrier that will be able to grow with you. The other portion of that is carriers or insurers are looking to be much more selective in who they insure. They're being very careful with regards to who they are bringing onto their books as a risk that they may have to pay a loss on. They recognize that losses do occur. This is insurance. But I think the bar has been raised a little bit. With regards to pricing, I think everyone should expect that rates will increase. We still have the ability to work with our clients to differentiate themselves, to mitigate these premium increases in a hard market. And fortunately, we're seeing insurers take the position that once they're on the risk, it's in everyone's best interest if they can make the company or the policyholder a better risk. So they're offering discounts and price reductions if clients show that they are going, above and beyond and engaging in active loss prevention. With regards to coverages, not surprisingly, cyber extortion and ransomware-driven coverage will continue to be scrutinized by insurers going forward. We will also continue to see the markets be challenged by silent cyber and those exclusions, as the P&C market makes it very unclear, despite the attempt at clarity, as to where they are landing with regards to coverage for both physical and financial cyber-related risk. From an underwriting process, we're going to continue to see increased scrutiny around ransomware, vendor risk, and business interruption. And fortunately, though, we're seeing, as one of the poll questions demonstrated, we're seeing buyers, both new buyers and existing buyers of cyber insurance, looking to buy greater limits as they see the risk become more increased, and broader solutions as technology becomes more of a peril that they realize they are facing that may exceed things like adverse weather and political unrest.
Very good. So in the last 2.5 minutes, I'll just round out some conclusions. And if you can bring up the slide, please, Lynn. Just in terms of looking ahead and where we are, changing the overall risk management. Arguably, the elevated longer tail risks that I highlighted at the beginning have been out there for a long time. But now looking forward, they just feel more real, more present, and more dangerous. As one of my clients said, 2020 is a bit of a dumpster fire. And all these things have manifested themselves in close proximity, even those risks that may have been out there for a while. So in terms of the risk management imperatives, it is truly important to understand the nature of risks you face, especially considering the current circumstances in the environment where people are working a different way. They may now have a different attitude to work. They may have to use technology in a different way. Also, we're in a position whereby understanding of the threats and the associated exposure, as both Bob and Tom have said, The threats for ransomware becoming the weapon of choice, where we've seen the ransoms themselves go from the tens and hundreds of thousands to the tens of millions, like we saw with Garmin, where their ransomware was for $10 million. The exposures have changed quite dramatically in a short period of time. But also in terms of preparedness and resilience, confirming that mitigation plans and practicalities are in place, e.g. through business continuity planning, but also supply chain risk. The reliance on more external parties that are connected together is higher than ever before. And it's not a good idea to be shaking hands on the battlefield and being introduced to these third parties. Understanding how they can help you, how you work together when bad things happen on a proactive basis is incredibly important to lower that cyber risk exposure. And also, as Bob has hinted, explore those opportunities for risk transfer. You can't always be building higher, thicker walls to your organization. There are clever ways by which you can look at enhanced and revisited insurance to say, this will deal with some of those longer tail risks, or it'll put us in a stronger position to respond when we need to in a different way than just saying we've got to throw more dollars at cybersecurity. And lastly, and something that's dear to my own heart, is making sure this actually works. So conducting practical exercises for those most present risks, e.g. ransomware. What will we do? If we do decide to pay, do we even know how to get Bitcoin? And if there are areas where we aren't going to pay, understand the potential implications of that for being able to resume our services and be resilient throughout. So I think the world has changed. We do have a different call to arms, as it were, through COVID to manage risks, but I'm still pretty excited that through these kind of conversations and proactive measures by many organizations, we can manage through these risks and hopefully have a more successful and stable 2021. So we're coming to the end. We'll share a replay of this in the coming days. The slides will be available online, and if anybody wants to review what they've seen there or share it with their colleagues, we'd welcome that. And thanks very much for those who participated, and we'll look forward to doing more of these conversations again. Personal thanks to Tom and Bob, always a pleasure, and we'll connect again soon.
Thank you. Thanks for all who participated and dialed in.
Thank you.
Likewise. Thanks, everyone.
Bye for now.